You deaf or you just slow?
Oops. Sorry about that, sir. Not a problem. You call this breakfast?
Don't eat those eggs. I saw what he did.
I've got a customer being aggressive, refusing to leave.
Sir, please just calm down.
Leave me alone.
The man in the gray jacket. Oh, would you look at that? Something the cat dragged in. Dylan didn't even lift his eyes from his phone. He just wrinkled his nose toward the door, the way you do when you catch a bad smell and want everyone around you to know it. Megan leaned over the counter, grinning. Sir, this isn't a soup kitchen. You got money, or you just here to warm up? The man in the gray jacket said nothing. He walked forward, slow and easy, hands loose at his side. Hey, I'm talking to you. Dylan finally looked up. You deaf, or you just slow? The man glanced at the menu board above their heads. His voice, when it came, was quiet and level. Blue plate breakfast, eggs scrambled, extra toast, please. That's $11.99. You sure you can swing that? The man set a 20 on the counter. No frown, no flinch, just calm. Now I want you to hold on to that face, that calm, because those two kids behind the counter had no idea who had just walked into their diner and what they were about to do over the next hour. Right there on that black and white checkered floor was going to follow them for the rest of their lives. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me back up. That morning had started quiet, real quiet. The man woke up at 5:30 in a house on the north side of Kansas City. It was a nice house, but nothing loud about it. No marble, no gold, no fountain out front. Just clean lines, warm wood floors, and a long hallway full of framed photographs. He walked past every one of them without stopping. If he had stopped, you'd have seen something. A photo of a younger man, maybe 26, standing in front of a tiny corner diner with a hand-painted sign. Another of him shaking hands with somebody important in a suit, a ribbon and a pair of scissors between them. A magazine cover framed behind glass, with his face on it and a headline he never liked to read out loud. And he didn't stop. He'd seen them 1,000 times, and he never much cared for looking at himself. In the bathroom mirror, he studied his reflection for a second. Tired eyes, kind eyes. Then he reached for the jacket hanging on the back of the door, gray, worn soft at the elbows. The kind of jacket a man wears for 20 years because it still does the job. Faded jeans. White sneakers with a crease worn straight down the middle. No watch, no ring, no cologne. He went out to the garage. There were 2 vehicles in there. One was the kind of car you'd expect from a man who lived in a house like that. The other was a beat-up pickup truck with a dent in the tailgate and 190,000 miles on it. He took the truck keys. This was something he did a couple times a year, no warning, no schedule. He never told a soul when he was going, or where. He'd pull on the old jacket, climb into the old truck, and go see the world the way a man with empty pockets sees it. Before he backed out, he reached into the jacket and clipped something to the inside pocket. A little camera, no bigger than the eraser on a pencil. You'd never spot it unless you knew to look. 40 minutes away, in a downtown office, a woman named Diane Foster was already at her desk with a laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside it. And her screen was a live feed, a little shaky, showing the inside of a truck cab and a stretch of morning road. The man's phone buzzed once. A text from Diane, I've got you. Legal's on standby, be careful today. He didn't text back, he just drove. The sun wasn't all the way up yet. The streets were empty and gray and soft, the way cities look before they wake. 40 minutes later, he pulled the truck into the lot of a diner in Millbrook, a working-class suburb southeast of the city. It was a Saturday morning, 9:15, and the breakfast rush was just starting to thin out. The lot was still half full. He sat there a minute, engine ticking as it cooled. Through the window, he could see inside. Checkered floors, red vinyl booths, an old jukebox in the corner playing something slow and warm. He looked at that room for a long moment, and something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, something older than a smile. Hen, he got out. The air outside smelled like syrup and coffee and bacon grease, drifting out of the kitchen vent and hanging in the cool morning. A little bell over the door chimed soft when he pushed it open. Inside, the place was alive. A young family sat by the window, the mother tucking a napkin into her little girl's collar. 2 college kids split a mountain of pancakes near the jukebox. An older couple lingered over coffee, and behind the counter stood 2 people. Dylan Pierce, late 20s, leaning against the back wall with one earbud in, scrolling his phone, chewing gum with his mouth wide open, shirt untucked. The look of a man who figured nobody was ever going to check. And Megan Hale, early 30s, standing at the second register, whispering something in Dylan's ear. Whatever it was, they both laughed. There was a customer standing right there at the counter, a man in work boots and a paint-flecked shirt, a plasterer maybe, waiting to order. Neither cashier looked at him. 10 seconds, 20, 30. The man cleared his throat, polite about it. Megan glanced up, breathed out through her nose like he was the biggest inconvenience of her whole morning, and said flat, "What?" No smile, no good morning, no eye contact. And then, not 15 seconds later, a young couple walked in wearing nice clothes, the woman with a designer bag on her arm. And Dylan? Dylan stood up straight, pulled out his earbud, lit up like a Christmas tree. "Hey, good morning, welcome to the Blue Plate. What can I get started for you two?" Same counter, same minute, two completely different people wearing the same face. Now, through the little pass-through window that connects the kitchen to the front, there was a woman watching all of this. Her name was Ruth Daniels, mid-50s. She'd cooked the morning shift at this diner for 6 years. Her hands never stopped moving over that grill, flipping eggs, turning bacon, but her jaw was tight as a fist. She had seen this exact scene play out 100 times. She had written it down twice on official complaint forms and handed them up the chain. Both times those complaints vanished into thin air. And there was a reason for that, which we'll get to. But Ruth had learned the hard way that speaking up in this place got you nothing but a colder shoulder from the boy at the register. So she cooked, and she watched, and she waited for a day that never seemed to come. The man in the gray jacket stood just inside the door, taking it all in. His hands hung loose at his sides, his face gave away nothing. Then he walked up to the counter, and that's when Dylan opened his mouth. Megan leaned over his shoulder to watch, folded her arms, raised one eyebrow like this was going to be good. "Gotta be careful these days," Dylan said, loud enough for the closest booth to hear. "You just never know what's gonna wander in off the street." The man said nothing, his hands stayed at his sides, he just watched. Dylan snatched up the 20, slapped it on the register drawer, and started punching in the order. His fingers moved fast, too fast. And the man in the gray jacket caught the little screen the second before it flipped over to the total. $11.99 for the platter, tax, and then a third line that had absolutely no business being there. Preparation fee, $3.75. Total, $16.49. The man tilted his head, just slightly. "What's the preparation fee?" Dylan didn't look up. "Standard charge. Everybody pays it. I've eaten at Blue Plate diners before, other locations. I've never once seen that on a receipt." Now Dylan looked up. He planted both palms flat on the counter and leaned in close, and his voice dropped, not to a whisper, to that low, hard tone that dares you to say one more word. "Maybe those other places do things soft. Here, that's the price. You want the food, or you want to hold up my line?" A woman in the booth behind him glanced over. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She looked away quick, pretending she hadn't heard. The man held Dylan's stare for 2 full seconds. Then he nodded once. "I'll take the food." Dylan made change out of the 20. But he didn't count it out, and he didn't hand it over. He shoved the coins across the counter with the back of his hand, careless, and 2 quarters and a dime rolled right off the edge, hit the tile, and spun in little circles before falling flat. Dylan looked down at the coins on the floor, then back up at the man, and his mouth curled into a lazy little smirk. Oops. Megan pressed a hand over her mouth. A laugh slipped out through her fingers anyway. The man in the gray jacket bent down without a word, picked up the coins one by one, slid them into his pocket, and then he walked to a booth near the kitchen window and sat down, quiet as ever. Under the table, he typed out a text. "Fake charge added to my order, almost $4. Not in our system. Keep recording." 4 seconds later, Diane wrote back, "Confirmed. It's not authorized anywhere. Legal is watching the feed live. Say the word." He set the phone face down, and he waited. Now here's a thing about waiting. When you're a man like this, waiting isn't doing nothing. Waiting is seeing everything. The diner hummed around him, forks scraping plates, low talk, the hiss of the grill, that old jukebox rolling through something soft and easy, the smell of butter and hash browns and coffee, all of it swirling together in the warm air. The young couple who'd ordered after him got their food first. Megan carried both plates out herself, set them down gentle as anything, smiled wide. "You two enjoy now. Holler if you need a thing." Their eggs were golden and fluffy and steaming, toast thick cut and glistening with butter. The man was still waiting. 5 more minutes, then 12. Finally, Megan brought his plate over, one hand carrying it, the other on her hip. She dropped it on the table with a thud that rattled the silverware, didn't say a word, turned and walked away without a backward glance. The man looked down at his plate. The eggs were overcooked, dry, rubbery, browning at the edges like they'd been sitting under a heat lamp, forgotten. The toast was 2 heel-end slices, the hard ends of the loaf that nobody wants, barely warmed through. 2 booths over, a man about his age was eating the exact same platter, fluffy eggs, flecked with pepper, golden buttered toast, same menu, same kitchen, same cook, same price, a completely different plate. And through that little pass-through window, Ruth Daniels saw his food go out. Her spatula stopped mid-flip. Because she had cooked that order herself, eggs scrambled soft, just the way the ticket said, bread from the center of the loaf. And what had landed on that table was not what left her grill. She looked toward the front. Dylan was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, watching the man in the gray jacket with a lazy, knowing little grin. The man picked up his fork, cut into the eggs, cold in the middle. He chewed once, set the fork down, and pushed the plate a few inches away. He didn't complain, didn't wave anyone over. He just sat there, watching the room, filing away every single thing he saw. And then the front door chimed again. An older woman stepped inside. She moved slow, one hand steadying herself on the doorframe. She wore a floral dress, neatly pressed, and a little hat pinned to the side of her hair, the kind of hat a woman wears to church, a thin gold chain at her collar, a small purse hanging from the crook of her arm. She made her way to the counter with careful, steady steps. Hagen was wiping the register screen, eyes down. "Excuse me, dear," the woman said, soft. "Could you tell me what the soup of the day is?" Megan kept wiping, 5 seconds, 15. The old woman stood perfectly still, waiting, with the patience of somebody who had spent a whole life waiting like this. "Excuse me," she said again, a little louder. Hagen finally looked up and let out a long, put-on sigh, the kind of sigh built to make a person feel like a burden just for standing there. "Ma'am, you're gonna have to speak up. I can't understand a word you're saying." She'd been speaking just fine. Everybody within 15 feet had heard her clear as a bell. "I was only asking about the—" And Dylan cut in from the back without even turning around. "Try the kids' menu. Simpler options, easier to point at." Hagen bit down on her lip. A laugh escaped through her nose anyway, a small, ugly little sound. The old woman's fingers tightened on her purse strap. Her chin dipped down toward her chest, her lips pressed together, not in anger, in that quiet rehearsal of a person who learned a long time ago that some rooms were never built for people like her. She turned, and she walked out without ordering. The bell chimed soft behind her, and that little sound just hung there in the air, like a scadad note nobody wanted to hear, nobody called after her, nobody cared. Nobody, that is, except the man in the gray jacket. Because when that old woman turned to leave, he got a good look at her face, and his own face changed. He knew her. Not from anything recent. From a long time ago, a lifetime ago, from back when he was a skinny 17-year-old kid washing dishes at a diner clear across the state, sleeping some nights in the storeroom because he didn't have anywhere else to be. There'd been a woman who worked the counter there, a woman who used to slide him a plate of whatever was left at the end of the night quiet so the owner wouldn't see, who used to tell him, "You eat, baby. A hungry man can't build anything." He'd never forgotten her face. Not in 30 years, not in 10,000 mornings. And she had just been laughed out of his diner. He set his coffee mug down. His hand was steady, but the knuckles had gone pale around the handle. He picked up his phone. "Diane, tell me you saw that." "Every second of it. Ray, who is she?" He looked out the window. The old woman was crossing the parking lot slow, holding her hat against the wind. "Somebody who was kind to me," he typed, when there was nothing in it for her. "Pull the loyalty records. I want her name." On it. He set the phone down. And whatever had been calm in him all morning, it was still calm. But it was a different kind of calm now. The kind of calm that comes right before everything changes. He needed to see the rest of it. So he ordered a second cup of coffee just to have a reason to sit, and he watched. And what he saw was not random, it was a system. A man came in wearing a delivery uniform, tired, on a break, and ordered a coffee to go. Dylan rang him up $2 over the board price. When the man frowned at it, Dylan just shrugged. Prices went up. They hadn't. The man in the gray jacket knew every price in that building, because he had approved every one of them himself. A woman in scrubs ordered an iced tea. Megan filled the cup halfway, snapped the lid on, slid it across without a word. 3 minutes later, a well-dressed teenager ordered the same tea, and Megan filled it to the brim, smiled, and said, "There you go, hon." A young man came in with a backpack, a community college hoodie ordered at the counter. Dylan pointed at the bag. Backpack stays up front. Store policy. There was no such policy. Not at this location, not at any of them. The kid hesitated, then set his bag by the door and went to wait. Not 30 seconds later, a man in a blazer walked in with a leather messenger bag over his shoulder, walked right past Dylan and sat down. Dylan didn't say one word about it. And the young man saw it, saw the whole thing happen in real time. He turned to Dylan, voice low but steady. "You didn't say anything to him about his bag." Dylan's grin dropped. He came out from behind the counter, closed the distance until they were 2 feet apart. "You got a problem? Because I can make a phone call right now. Cops love guys who make trouble." The kid's jaw went tight. His eyes dropped to the floor. When his food came, he grabbed it, grabbed his backpack, and walked out without a word. The man in the gray jacket did some quiet math in his head, the fake fees, the padded prices, the half-poured drinks. He figured Dylan was skimming maybe $300 a shift. And Megan was covering it, voiding the extra charges out of the register after each customer left, so the drawer balanced at the end of the night. It wasn't sloppy, it was organized. It had the smooth feel of something that had been running a long, long time. That was enough. He'd seen enough. He got up, walked to the back toward the restroom. The narrow hallway there was lined with framed photos. The first diner, the first crew, arms around each other, the first newspaper write-up mounted behind glass. He'd hung those photos himself in every single location, all 52 of them. On his way back, the kitchen door was cracked open a few inches, and there stood Ruth Daniels, spatula in one hand, apron dusted with flour, her dark eyes locked right on his through the gap. She looked left, she looked right, and she whispered, "Don't eat those eggs." The man stopped. "I saw what he did, right before your plate went out. He had it sitting under the lamp on purpose, and she swallowed. He spit in the grits on the last poor fella who gave him lip. I don't know what he did to yours, but don't eat it." Cold went straight down the man's spine. "I've tried telling somebody," Ruth went on, the words tumbling now, fast like water breaking through a crack that's held too long. "Twice, wrote it all down, handed it right up the ladder. Both times, nothing came back, nothing. Because the regional manager, Roy Pierce, that's Dylan's uncle. The complaints just disappear into his drawer and they never come out." Her eyes were glassy, not crying, just the bone-tired look of a woman who'd been carrying something too heavy, too long, all by herself. The man looked at her, steady, and his voice, when it came, was quiet and sure. "Thank you, I heard you, and I promise you that's the last complaint of yours that ever disappears." Ruth blinked hard. She didn't understand what he meant, but something in the way he said it made her nod fast and step back behind the door. The man returned to his booth. He looked at that plate of eggs one more time, and he pushed it clear to the far edge of the table. He picked up his phone. "Diane, full legal standby. Call the county health department and pull every complaint filed at this location in the last 8 months, every single one. I want to know how many got buried." "Already moving. Ray, the team can be there in 20 minutes. Send them." He set the phone face down. His posture hadn't changed. His voice hadn't risen once since he'd walked through that door. But behind his eyes, something had come all the way awake. He wasn't just watching anymore. Now, he could have walked up to that counter right then and ended it, but he didn't get the chance, because Dylan wasn't done. The man went back up to the register, every step easy, measured, calm. His sneakers barely made a sound on the tile. He looked Dylan dead in the eye and asked one question. "Do you treat everybody who walks in here like this? Or just the ones who look like they don't have much?" The diner went quiet. A fork stopped scraping somewhere behind him. The jukebox hit the gap between songs, and the silence felt enormous. Dylan blinked. Then his face hardened. He squared up and leaned across the counter. "What did you just say to me?" Megan grabbed the store phone, held it like a prop, finger hovering. "Should I call somebody?" The man didn't move. "I'd like to speak with your manager." Dylan let out one sharp laugh. "I am the manager on shift, and my uncle runs this whole region, so good luck with that, pal." The man nodded slow. "All right?" And he turned like he was going back to his booth. "Yeah, that's what I thought," Dylan called after him. "You don't like how we run things? Door's right there. Nobody's stopping you." The man didn't answer. He sat back down. And that should have been the end of it. But Dylan picked up the phone. He dialed, and his voice went smooth and casual, the practiced voice of a man who'd done this before and knew exactly how to sound. "Yeah, hi. I've got a customer here being real aggressive, refusing to leave, making threats to my staff. Can you send somebody out?" "Thanks." The man in the gray jacket had not raised his voice one time. He had not moved toward anyone. He had not made a single threat. He'd asked one question. But Dylan was building a story, and Megan started helping him build it. She stepped out from behind the register and started performing for the whole room, her voice loud and shaky and theatrical. "Sir, we asked you nicely to leave. We don't want any trouble here. Please just calm down." The man was sitting in a booth with his hands folded on the table. He hadn't said a word in 30 seconds, but the scene was being set. 2 employees, one quiet stranger who looked like he had nothing. A call to the police. The kind of story that writes itself the second a squad car pulls into the lot. A couple of customers pulled out their phones and started recording. An older man in a ball cap shook his head, slow. A mother by the window quietly gathered her kids and moved to a farther booth. 4 minutes later, a Millbrook police cruiser rolled into the lot, no lights, but every head in that diner turned to the window. Officer Dale Reynolds walked in, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, one hand resting easy on his belt. His eyes swept the room, reading it before anyone said a word. Dylan was already moving, coming around the counter, pointing. "That guy right there. He's been harassing my staff, refusing to leave, getting aggressive." I called because I was genuinely worried about everybody's safety. Officer Reynolds looked at the man in the gray jacket. The man hadn't moved, hands folded, coffee half gone in front of him. "Sir," Reynolds said, walking over, "gonna need to see some ID." The man reached into his jacket, slow, and set his license on the table. Reynolds picked it up, read the name, looked at the man's face, read the name again. And then something in his expression shifted just a hair. "Officer," the man said, calm. "I asked one question about the service here. I haven't raised my voice, I haven't threatened a soul, and I haven't refused to leave." Reynolds glanced around the room. The 2 customers with phones were still filming. The old man in the ball cap caught the officer's eye and shook his head, slow. A small, clear signal that said everything without a single word. Not one person in that whole diner backed up Dylan's story, not one. Reynolds turned to Dylan, and his tone had gone noticeably cooler. "I'm not seeing a disturbance here. I'm going to need to speak to both of you, separately." Dylan's face cracked, just a little. A flicker behind the eyes, like a man realizing the script he'd rehearsed might not go the way he'd planned. But it was too late for scripts, because outside another vehicle had just pulled into the lot, and the woman climbing out of it was about to change everything. The front door opened. The bell chimed one more time. Diane Foster stepped inside. Navy blazer, pressed white blouse, heels that clicked sharp against the tile. She carried a tablet in one hand and a leather folder in the other. Behind her came 2 men, broad-shouldered, calm-faced, wearing black polos with a small gold logo stitched on the chest. Had the blue plate logo. Every conversation in the room dropped to a murmur. Even the jukebox seemed to hush. Dylan glanced at the door. He didn't recognize any of them. He stepped forward, chest out, still riding the last of his adrenaline. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of something here. You'll have to wait." Diane didn't look at him. She didn't slow down. She walked past the counter, past Officer Reynolds, and stopped right in front of the booth where the man in the gray jacket sat. "Mr. Donnelly," she said. Clear, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "We have everything. Legal's reviewed the footage. We're ready whenever you are." Dylan's mouth came open. His eyes darted from Diane to the man and back. The man stood up from the booth. He didn't rush. He reached to his jacket collar and unzipped it partway, and there, clipped inside the pocket, was the little camera. That lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, had been recording every second since he walked through the front door. He looked at Dylan, then at Megan, frozen behind the register with the phone still in her hand, and he spoke. "My name is Ray Donnelly. I'm the founder and the owner of the Blue Plate. Every location, every menu, every paycheck." He paused. "Including yours. You could have heard a pin drop, no forks, no grill, no music, just the hum of the lights and Dylan's breathing getting heavier by the second." Dylan's face went from red to white in about 5 seconds. His lips moved, but nothing came out. Finally, a broken little stammer. "Wait, I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Ray's voice was still calm, but there was iron under it now. "You didn't know that the man you insulted and overcharged and dropped his change on the floor for a laugh and called the police on for asking a question. You didn't know he built this place out of a used griddle and a $500 loan 30 years ago?" Dylan had no answer. His mouth hung open like a door off its hinge. "You didn't know," Ray went on, "that the man whose eggs you left to rot under a heat lamp on purpose is the man who signs your check every 2 weeks? Hagen's hands were shaking against the counter. She pressed them flat to make it stop. It didn't work. Diane stepped forward and turned the tablet around so the screen faced the room, split screen. On the left, Ray's body camera, every insult, every smirk, every fake fee punched into that register in crisp, clear detail. On the right, the diner's own ceiling cameras, the angles Dylan and Megan had forgotten existed, or figured nobody ever bothered to check. Dylan pocketing cash after a void, Megan covering the voids, Dylan's hand hovering over a plate before it went out the window. The old woman laughed at, turning for the door. The college kid forced to give up his backpack while a man in a blazer strolled right past. 18 months of it laid bare in 4 minutes. Officer Reynolds watched the whole thing without moving. When the clip of the food tampering played, his jaw tightened and his hand moved to the notepad on his belt. Dylan tried one last card, his voice cracked, desperate, reaching for the only lifeline he'd ever had. My uncle, Roy Pierce, he's the regional manager. Just call him. He'll straighten this out. He'll explain. Roy Pierce, Diane said, cutting him off clean, was placed on administrative leave 40 minutes ago. Legal is already reviewing 18 months of error complaints and falsified performance reviews with his name on them. She let that sit. There's no one left to call, Dylan. Dylan's knees buckled. He caught himself on the counter with one hand. Megan let out a small, choked sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Officer Reynolds closed his notepad. I'm going to need a copy of that footage, the tampering, specifically. That's a felony under state law. Already prepared, Diane said. Your department will have it within the hour. Ray Donnelly stood in the middle of his own diner, surrounded by the silence of 2 people whose whole world had just come down in 3 minutes. He didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He looked at Dylan, the man who'd told him he looked like something the cat dragged in, and he said quiet, You had a good job. You had a steady paycheck. You had customers who trusted you. And this is what you did with all of it. Dylan said nothing. For the first time all morning, he had nothing to say. Then he broke. His whole body seemed to cave in. He took a step toward Ray, palms up, voice cracking into something that was trying to sound like remorse. Mr. Donnelly, look, I was having a bad day. I swear I didn't mean any of it. It was jokes. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Ray looked at him the way you look at a man who just insulted your intelligence and expected a thank you for it. A bad day, he repeated. We've got footage going back 18 months, Dylan. 18 months of fake fees. 18 months of skimming the drawer. 18 months of people getting treated like dirt because of what they were wearing. 18 months of Ruth Daniels filing complaints your uncle threw in the trash. He let each one land like a stone dropped in still water. That's not a bad day. That's who you are when you think nobody's watching. Dylan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His eyes were wet, and it wasn't from guilt, it was from fear. The kind that hits when you realize every exit's locked, and you're the one who turned the key. Then Megan tried. She stepped out from behind the register, tears running, hands clasped at her chest. I didn't want any of this. Dylan told me what to do, and I was scared of losing my job, so I just went along with it. I never wanted to hurt anybody. Diane opened the folder. She laid 3 printed screenshots on the counter, one at a time, each one time stamped. This is you laughing after an elderly woman left this diner in tears. This is you voiding a fraudulent charge while Dylan counted cash behind you. And this is you leaning over to tell him which customer to hit with the fee next. She looked her in the eye. You weren't a bystander, Megan. You were his partner. Hagen grabbed the counter and sobbed, loud and ugly and shaking. Nobody moved to comfort her. Ray straightened his back. Dylan Pierce, Megan Hale, you're both terminated effective right now. Theft, fraud, health code violations. Final checks will be mailed. You are not to set foot in this or any blue plate again. Officer Reynolds stepped up. I'll need you both to stay available. That food tampering alone is a felony. Dylan didn't fight it. He walked toward the door, head down, one security officer on each side. His steps were slow and heavy on the tile, the same tile he'd stood on all morning like he owned the place. Hagen followed, still crying, clutching her purse. The door swung shut, the bell chimed, that same cheerful little sound it always made, but this time it sounded like the period at the end of a very long sentence. And then somebody clapped, slow at first, then more of them joined in. The old man in the ball cap nodded once toward Ray. The mother who'd moved her kids wiped her eyes. But Ray wasn't listening to the applause. He'd already turned toward the kitchen. Ruth Daniels stood at the pass-through window. She hadn't moved, spatula still in her hand, apron still dusted with flour. But her face had changed. She looked like a woman watching a locked door swing open for the first time in years, afraid to believe it was real. Ray walked to the kitchen doorway. Ruth, he said, gentle, you did the right thing, twice. You filed those complaints and the system in this building failed you every time. That ends today. She blinked. Her lips trembled. "I'd like you to run this location. Shift manager, effective right now, and every complaint you ever filed is going into a formal investigation." Your voice mattered, Ruth. It always did. Somebody just wasn't listening. Her spatula slipped out of her hand and clattered against the steel counter. She pressed both palms over her mouth, and then the tears came. Not the desperate, cornered tears Megan had cried. The quiet, deep, shaking kind that only come when something you'd stopped letting yourself hope for finally arrives. 6 years. 6 years of cooking good food and keeping her head down and hoping somebody, anybody, would listen. Somebody finally did. But Ray had one more thing to do, and it was the thing that mattered most. He walked out the front door, into the cool morning, and he looked across the parking lot toward Little Bench by the bus stop at the edge of the lot. And there she was. The old woman in the floral dress and the little church hat, sitting with her purse in her lap, waiting for a bus, still holding onto her dignity like a coat pulled tight against the cold. Ray walked over, and he sat down on the bench beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just sat. Then, quiet, he said, "Ma'am, do you happen to remember a diner on Route 9 30 years back? Little place. There was a boy there who washed dishes. Skinny kid, used to fall asleep in the storeroom." The old woman turned and looked at him for a long, long moment. Her eyes moved over his face, searching, and then something in them softened, and something else caught. "There was a boy," she said slowly, "hungry thing. Never had 2 nickels. I used to feed him at closing so old Mr. Harmon wouldn't see." Ray's eyes filled. "You told him a hungry man can't build anything." Her hand came up to her mouth. "That was you?" He nodded, and for the first time all morning, he smiled. A real one. "Your name is Alice Bennett," he said. "I had my people look. I've been trying to remember your name for 30 years, and I couldn't, and I felt bad about it every single day, so." "Alice." He took a breath. "I owe you about 1,000 meals, and I've built 52 places to serve them in." Alice Bennett laughed, and it turned into a cry, and she reached over and took his hand in both of hers, the way you hold something you thought you'd lost. "You come back inside," Ray said. "Ruth's running things now. She makes the best soup in 3 counties. And Alice, there's a booth by the window with your name on it. Every day for as long as you want it. On the house, forever. That's not charity, that's a debt, and I mean to pay it." Now that could be where the story ends, but it isn't. Because I promised you these 2 would pay for what they did, and I don't leave a story half told. The investigation tore that location apart, board to board. Every receipt, every void, every drawer count, and it was worse than even Ray had guessed. The skimming had been running 18 months. The total came to just over $60,000. Roy Pierce, the uncle, had buried 9 separate complaints. 9, including both of Ruth's. He'd been signing off on glowing reviews of Dylan for 2 years, reviews that read like fiction, because that's exactly what they were. When the company lawyers asked him why, all he said was, "He's family. I was trying to give the kid a chance to grow." A chance to grow, 18 months of theft, and he called it that. The charges came down hard. Dylan Pierce was charged with felony food tampering, theft, and filing a false police report. Megan Hale took a plea, accessory to fraud, and got probation, community service, and a mark on her record that would sit on the top of every job application for the rest of her life. Roy Pierce was charged with obstruction and falsifying business records, and he was barred for good from ever managing in the food business again. But here's the part I really want you to hear. About a year after all of it, a letter came to the Blue Plate corporate office, handwritten, from Dylan Pierce. He'd done his time. He was working a warehouse night shift now, and going to the meetings the court ordered, and somewhere in all of that, something had finally cracked open in him. The letter wasn't asking for his job back. It wasn't asking for anything. It said, "I've watched that video of myself about 100 times, the one everybody shared. And every time I look at that man I called something the cat dragged in, and I don't recognize who I was. I thought I was somebody because I could make other people feel small. I know now that's the smallest a person can be. I'm sorry. Not because I got caught. Because you were right. That's who I was when I thought nobody was watching. I'm trying to be somebody different now. Somebody who'd have handed that man his change with both hands." Ray read it twice, and then he wrote back just one line. "The fact that you finally saw it means you're already becoming him. Keep going." 6 months later, the diner in Millbrook looked like a different place. Not the walls, not the checkered floors, not the red booths or the old jukebox still rolling through Motown on a slow Saturday morning. Those stayed the same. Ray had built them to last, and they did. What changed was the feeling. Ruth Daniels stood behind the counter now. not hiding behind the pass-through, not whispering warnings through a cracked door, running the place. Her name tag said so, and her shoulders said it louder. She greeted every single person who walked in, and she meant it every time. The staff around her were new and trained right, and they smiled because they wanted to. And every morning, 9:15, an old woman in a floral dress and a little church hat came through the front door. She didn't brace herself at the threshold anymore. She didn't get ready for what might come from behind the counter. She walked in like she belonged, because she did. "Morning, Miss Alice," Ruth would call. "The usual?" "Yes, baby, the soup. And a little of that cornbread if you've got it." "Always got it for you." Alice would sit in the booth by the window, the same booth where once 2 people had made her feel like she wasn't welcome in her own neighborhood. Now she sat there with her soup and her cornbread and a little laminated card in her purse she kept like a badge of honor. And one Saturday in the late spring, the front door opened and a man walked in, not in a gray jacket this time, just a plain shirt, an easy smile, nothing flashy about him at all. Ruth looked up and her whole face lit, and she came around that counter and hugged him, and he hugged her right back, and neither one of them said a word for a while. They didn't need to. Ray Donnelly stood outside afterward, looking up at the blue plate sign he'd designed with his own hands all those years ago, back when the whole thing was just a dream held together by a used griddle and a $500 loan. And he thought about the hungry kid he used to be, the one who fell asleep in a storeroom, the one who a tired old waitress fed at closing time for no reason at all except that it was the right thing to do. He'd built all of this so that every person who walked through the door, no matter what they were wearing, no matter what they had in their pockets, would sit down and feel like they mattered. What Dylan and Megan did was a betrayal of that. What Roy did was a betrayal of trust. But what Ruth did, refusing to go quiet even when nobody was listening, that was the reason the whole thing survived. Because here's the truth of it, and it's simple. The people who abuse a little scrap of power are always the ones most terrified when real power finally walks through the door. And the people who stay silent when they see something wrong, over time, they become part of the wrong. But the ones who speak up, even when it's scary, even when nobody seems to be listening, even when the system is broken and the complaints keep vanishing into somebody's drawer, those are the people who change everything. So let me leave you with the one thing this whole story comes down to: who you are when you think nobody's watching. That's the only version of you that's real. Not the smile you save for the boss. Not the handshake you give the important people. The real you is the one who shows up on a slow Saturday morning when you figure nobody's checking. And here's what most folks forget. Somebody is always watching. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, the truth finds its way out. It always does. So do yourself a favor. Be the same person in every room. Treat the man in the gray jacket the way you'd treat the man in the suit. Not because you never know who's standing in front of you, but because it's the right thing to do, whether the cameras are rolling or not. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever watched somebody get treated differently because of how they looked, and what did you do about it? I read everyone. And remember, the cameras don't have to be rolling for the truth to find you. It always does.